Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Lewin. I'm the CEO of the Computer History Museum. I hope everyone is well and safe today. I'm pleased to welcome you to our virtual event featuring author Brad Stone on Amazon's unprecedented growth and its billionaire founder, Jeff Bezos. It's one of the most important business stories of a technology company of our time. Our programs are made possible through the generosity of our members and donors, and today we need your support more than ever to sustain the museum in delivering on our mission, which is to decode technology for everyone, its computing past, digital present, and its future impact on humanity. And today's story is going to bring some of that to light. Please visit our website to join and give today. To introduce today's program and the speakers is Marguerite Gong Hancock, the museum's VP of Innovation. Marguerite?
Thanks so much, Daniel. I'm delighted to add my warm welcome to each of you. Today's program continues the museum's ongoing exploration of innovation, including the founders and builders of innovative tech companies that are disrupting industries and impacting the lives of all of us. Can you imagine life without Amazon? The company's changed the way we shop. It's invented products like Alexa, from buying groceries at Whole Foods to watching media on Prime Video, using services on Amazon Cloud, or reading news on the Washington Post. It's nearly impossible to go a day without encountering the impact of Amazon and its now billionaire founder. Jeff Bezos' empire, once housed in a garage, now spans the globe. Its workforce has quintupled in size and its valuation has soared to well over $1 trillion. So what's the story behind how an internet retail upstart has become one of the most powerful entities in the global economy? How have seismic changes inside the company over the past decade led to dramatic innovations, as well as some missteps that have turned public sentiment against it? And what drives Bezos, now a tech titan with global ambitions in Washington, Hollywood, and outer space? Almost 10 years ago, journalist Brad Stone captured the rise of Amazon as an internet company changing the way we shop online in his bestseller, The Everything Store. Drawing on interviews since then with hundreds of current and former employees, competitors, regulators, and critics, Brad has just published a new book, Amazon Unbound, which tells the story of Amazon's evolution into a global empire today. So to examine this story, we're thrilled to feature Brad in conversation with Bloomberg colleague Emily Chang. Here are 5 numbers, as is our tradition here at CHM, to introduce Brad. 24 years as journalist covering Silicon Valley, 4 numbers of books written, 2 about Amazon. 1998, year of first Amazon purchase, a parenting book for a friend. 186 billion, Jeff Bezos' personal fortune. 2, he's a twin and also father of twins. He quipped his family is reproducing exponentially. Brad Stone is the senior executive editor of global technology at Bloomberg News. Brad, welcome.
Thank you, Marguerite.
And now our moderator. When thinking about who might engage Brad in a far-reaching and probing conversation, we thought first of Emily Chang. Emily's anchor and executive producer at Bloomberg TV. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist who reports on global tech, media, startups, and the future of business. She hosts the daily Bloomberg Technology Show. She just finished, in fact, and the long-form interview series, Bloomberg Studio 1.0. She's also known for her first book, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley. Emily, it's a particular pleasure to welcome you for the first time to the CHM virtual stage as well. Emily and Brad, we look forward to your conversation.
All right. Marguerite, thank you so much for joining us and for having us here. So Brad, you've been at this now, the book came out yesterday. It's been a long few days. I saw you on CNN over the weekend. How you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good, but Emily, you've been there from the beginning. I think probably 2017, you were finishing up Brotopia, and I came and said, I have this weird notion of doing another Bezos book, and I can't remember what you said. You probably told me that I was insane, but now that I'm at the end of it, I'm feeling pretty good.
I did not tell you you were insane. I told you that you should do it. And I actually remember your first book about Amazon, and obviously it was, a raving success. And clearly, I think, you knew pretty soon after that was written that there was a lot more to do. And so here you are. So I'm so proud of you, and I'm really excited to be here today and to help you get through this week, which is, I know, a hard week for authors, but certainly so exciting. I actually want to start with your first book, The Everything Store, which of course became an international bestseller, won a bunch of awards. What inspired you to write another book about Amazon, knowing how hard it was to do it just once?
I was proud of the Everything Store. I felt like I had, told a history of an important public institution, Amazon, that was changing our economic reality in good ways and bad. And, Emily, as you know, you kind of hit the road to talk about your book, and you're out there, a domain expert. But with Amazon, the story kept changing. And so as I'm talking about this company, the Kindle company became the Alexa company. The $100 billion market cap was going up and up and up. It's 1.6 trillion. One of my numbers there, Jeff Bezos's fortune, 186 billion, according to the Bloomberg Rich List, of course. When I wrote The Everything Store, it was maybe 20 billion, right? So, and because of the accumulation of wealth, Bezos's personal stature, his fame, explodes. And so essentially I'm out there talking about the company as an expert, and it's changing. And so I felt like if I'm going to continue to be, I always joke the world, one of the world's leading Bezosologists, and an expert on Amazon, then like the Star Wars episode needed an Empire Strikes Back, episode 2, or what do they call it? Episode 5. I needed to update the history. So that's why I did it.
Well, actually, you really do a good job of signposting in the book, the numbers, and it is astonishing. So in 2010, Amazon was a $34 billion company. Bezos was worth $16 billion. Now it is a $1.6 trillion company. Bezos is worth $191 billion. It's incredible. And so I wonder, in 2010, even as you were writing the first book, did you ever think it would become that big, or that he would become that big?
Definitely not. No, that is probably a lack of imagination on my part. But back then, there were a couple of things that were difficult to foresee. One is Amazon's pioneering of AI and Alexa and the supermarkets. Another was their decision that they needed to start delivering packages themselves, driving our roads and highways. A third thing is the globalization of the marketplace. So, back then, the Amazon marketplace was kind of a tame, orderly affair, mostly with sellers from North America. And now it's a globalized marketplace, and you have sellers from China and other countries. And, there's a lot more selection, and there are lower prices. And then there's also a lot of chaos, and there's some fraud and counterfeits. And so that was all difficult to see. Some of that, happened because of competitive threats. Amazon acquired Whole Foods and really started to take groceries seriously. I tell the story in the book, in part because, Google starts delivering grocery store items, and Instacart's rise, and Amazon, and Bezos identifies a competitive threat and starts to view grocery items as more of a land rush opportunity rather than this thing that they can kind of wait to invest in. So all that I feel like was obscure back then. And now is sort of like almost quite evident and obvious that this is one of the handful of defining companies of our age.
Now, although your first book was critically acclaimed, some people didn't like it, including Mackenzie Bezos, who is Jeff Bezos' wife.
Mackenzie Scott.
At the time, indeed, she's now changed her name, who gave it a 1-star review on Amazon. And I remember that day, and I remember your reaction. And look, I wrote a book, when you write in a book that not everyone is going to like it. But what impact did that have on you? And why didn't that deter you?
Oh, interesting. I mean, my reaction in the moment was, you might remember it better than I, but sort of akin to panic, right? Like here, it seemed like a really personal rebuke from, if not, just Mackenzie, but from Bezos, and I hadn't anticipated that the reaction would be so personal. But, I remember writing a little bit of a retort for the Business Week website at the time, and and then it ended up perversely maybe kind of helping the Everything Store, and then like a lot of criticism, you kind of forget about it, and it was the fact that like the company stature increased, and employees and former employees kind of tended to say that the book got most things right, that sort of like able to move beyond it and sort of see it as maybe a little bit of a misstep on their part, because it kind of raised the prominence and brought more attention to the book. And then years passed, and I went back to Amazon with the idea for Amazon Unbound, and that was water under the bridge, by and large. And they cooperated with this book, and I was able to talk to senior executives and Bezos' personal friends, and so none of that was an impediment to really creating this next installment in the Amazon story.
But what about Jeff Bezos in particular? And of course, we have a lot of time here, so I'm just going to dig as far in as I can.
You're just you're going for it.
You found and revealed his biological father in the process of writing that book, which was a big deal. And I'm curious, as far as you know, how did he personally react to that book?
It wasn't favorable, and partly was, in retrospect, probably how I sort of went about it. And I don't know if folks remember at the time, but his biological father hadn't known what had become of the family. And so when I went and knocked on his door for the Everything Store, it was a sort of revelation to him, that his son had become one of the most famous business people in the world. And he has since passed away. But at the time, he wanted to get back in touch with the family. It created a kind of set of issues that, probably could have been more deftly navigated by me. But as to whether like Jeff Bezos didn't cooperate personally with this book, and what I say is, like, if you look at the volume of public appearances and interviews that he's done over the past few years, it's a small number, with mostly well-known interviewers or employees. Once he had his brother interview him. So I don't think that really under any circumstance he was going to sit down for the kind of revealing reflection that, for example, Steve Jobs gave to Walter Isaacson. That is really not in his nature right now. I haven't seen it recently. He might do that in the future. So I don't think he was likely to cooperate with this either way. Maybe the history didn't help, but I also think that in the interviews that you see him give, he's not often particularly revealing. And the kind of book I wanted to write wasn't really going to be, it was never going to be a hagiography. I don't really even consider it an adversarial piece of work. I'm kind of telling the story, the uncomfortable bits and the positive breakthroughs. And he often doesn't reflect in that way. So I don't know that it made much of a difference.
Well, and you do a masterful job of telling that story, telling the story of, talking about him personally and what kind of a leader he is, but also so many different secrets and nuances about the team and how Amazon works. In fact, you open the book with an anecdote where you have followed him to Washington, D.C., and you ask him a question, and I just sort of imagine, his reaction as he's, taking a question from you in the audience. Did it feel like there was some sort of hyper connection there?
No, well, I do remember feeling like that there was a little bit of an intense laser-eyed stare, and I think I described that in the book, but I don't know that was special for me.
So let's talk then about the reporting process and how you managed to do this. All of the volume of people, probably hundreds of people that you talked to get under the hood, to find out all of these, the way that you organize the book is it starts with Alexa, and you talk about the Whole Foods acquisition. Each of these are chapters that are sort of big bets that Amazon and Jeff Bezos has taken. Talk to us about the reporting process of covering a company that is, yes, they cooperated, but yes, also they're very secretive, and also Jeff Bezos perhaps doesn't want to be,
right.
All of his secrets to be revealed. Talk to us how you did that.
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge is, right, it's a decentralized company. They're doing a million things. It's not necessarily a chronological story. So there's the challenge of organizing everything, finding the kind of straight line from, beginning to end. fortunately, Amazon's a place with with a lot of turnover. There are plenty of employees who leave, some of whom are kind of willing to share what they saw at the revolution, their experiences, what they see as the mistakes or the breakthroughs. And so it's really a matter of kind of accumulating that just a great number of testimony and meshing people's stories together, figuring out who's credible, whether some people have an agenda or not. And then fortunately, I probably had about a dozen or so interviews with senior executives at Amazon, and they were pretty forthcoming, actually. Folks like Dave Clark, who runs the operations team, or Jeff Wilkie, who was running the consumer business and recently retired, or Andy Jassy, I talked to, the new CEO, and then some plenty of other, engineers and other people inside the organization. So it's just like weaving a quilt, it's just like accruing a lot of anecdotes and stories and recollections and testimony, and then weaving it all together.
Is weaving the quilt more difficult in a pandemic, especially when your subject is a major topic of conversation in the pandemic?
Well, the one thing that was easier about it was I wasn't getting on a plane. I had sort of anticipated over the last year that I would be going back and forth to Seattle a lot. And I'm talking to you right now from my garage. And I've prettied it up, but I'm looking at the garage door right now. And this is where I wrote the book and spent a lot of the last year. And so in that respect, but it also gave me I think a really nice last chapter, because the book is essentially about not just the growth story, but this question of like, is Amazon good for the world? Does it add more than it extracts? And what does it mean when one company and one person has so much power? And the pandemic was like a great crystallization of all of the issues that I was sort of dealing with. And there are plenty of reasons to criticize Amazon's navigation of the pandemic. I think in the early days in particular, it put its employees at risk, for their lives, because they came in and had to work at a time of ambiguous CDC guidance and a virus that was rampaging across the world. And at the same time, the other side of that coin is it was one of the few institutions that kind of remained upright during the last year and was a lifeline to a lot of people and a lot of families, including my own. And so, it kind of crystallizes the real complex issues around Amazon. Ultimately, I think they probably did a pretty good job. They were also in the position of really being able to invest in a lot of the safeguards and precautions and technologies that allowed them to kind of skate through. And of course, they were enormously fortunate because we were all scared to go into stores for a year. And so it was kind of an accelerant, a shot of steroids to a business that was already growing very fast.
I should mention that we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Brad, please submit it and I will try to get to it. The book, Brad, chronicles so many different, I call them moonshots of Amazon's, from Alexa to Amazon Studios to buying Whole Foods to conquering India, Amazon Web Services, Blue Origin, buying the Washington Post. I mean, the list goes on. Which of these started as a provocative idea from Bezos himself and was really driven by him versus the team?
Right. A lot of the ideas at Amazon, you do the archaeology and you dig and dig to find what the origin point is. And so often it is the idea from Bezos. And chapter 1 is the Alexa story. And, I go back to 2010 where he's looking to exploit the advantage that Amazon Web Services, the cloud business, is giving to Amazon. And he's looking for kind of consumer applications at the same time as his technical assistant, a guy named Greg Hart, is evangelizing for voice recognition and voice search. And he shows them a Google voice search app when they're at lunch one day. And Bezos sends an email, and I have the email in the book. It's along the lines of, we should create a $20 computer whose brain is in the cloud that's completely controllable by your voice. And that email goes out, and that's Alexa, and he draws it on the whiteboard. I have the sketch. Thank you.
Hang on, you should buy the book, but I'm just going to give you a peek at the drawing.
The first January 2011 Bezos sketch of Alexa with his TA at the time, Greg Hart. And so he creates this thing. It springs right from his mind, and then he not only micromanages the project to a ne'er thee well over the next 4 years. He selects the voice of Alexa. He authorizes the investment. He tells Greg Hart, hire any AI or voice specialist you can. There's no limit, and he nurtures it in a way that kind of only a founder can. And it's why Amazon might suffer a little bit if he does step aside and kind of ushers it out into the world. So that's kind of one example of how I really think he is sort of central to Amazon's inventiveness.
You also found the voice of Alexa. I believe she's Colorado.
Right.
Tom White, tell us about that.
Right. Well, actually, it goes back to what you were saying before, actually, about the biological father. And when I was thinking about this new book, I thought to myself, well, who else can I identify here? Presumably there is not another long lost relative. How can I possibly top that? And I thought, we knew at the time that there was a woman named Susan Bennett, who is the voice of Siri. And that had become public maybe in like 2013 or 14. And so I thought, well, who is Alexa? Who is arguably the most ubiquitous voice maybe in human history? I don't know, Emily, if we could brainstorm someone else, maybe James Earl Jones, but arguably like Alexa, it would qualifies. And so I thought, well, that's a challenge worth some detective work. And ultimately, I did some digging. They had bought a Polish company to create the voice, and the Polish company had used the Atlanta studio that did Siri to audition voices. And I was kind of canvassing former employees, and I discovered that there was this voiceover actress named Nina Raleigh who lived in Boulder. And I went to her website, and she had clips of some of her other voiceover work, and it was uncanny. Like, I knew right away. You could tell that this was the voice that was coming out of my Echo in my kitchen.
And I know that you reached out to her. I don't think Amazon really wanted you to talk to her.
Right. She couldn't talk.
But you do tell the story of like just how much work was involved, right? In voicing enough to have Alexa be able to respond to almost anything. Which is
my
kind of amazing technological, but also untechnological feat.
Right. Yeah. My understanding of the process is that these voiceover actors or actresses will go into a studio and they'll read from prepared texts, like not anything exciting, and even kind of in a monotone. And they could do that for hours and days and months. And then the AI takes it and basically splits apart and combines various parts of words and syllables and phrases to create the voice engine that will respond to queries. So it's an incredible process. It sounds like a little bit of maybe a mind-numbing one for the actors and actresses, but I have a sense that they're well compensated.
Now, during your reporting process, something big happened before the pandemic, and that was that Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie announced they were getting a divorce. And within hours, there was news of an affair with a former TV anchor. And I will not ever forget you and I trying to get a hard copy of the National Enquirer, which is actually really hard in the middle of San Francisco. And I think we got a digital copy first. Someone sent it to us. And there it was. And I wonder how much that surprised you for someone that you'd been chronicling for such a long time, who you talk about in the book is almost meticulously choreographed in public. Did it shock you that not only had that happened, but that it had leaked to the press?
Oh, it was completely astonishing. And I think not just for me, but for a lot of people at Amazon and people who believe they were kind of close to the Bezos family. It probably says more about how private they are than anything else. But, here was someone whose family life had kind of become integral to his public persona. He had talked about it a lot. And he's also just so disciplined and so careful and holds his employees to such high standards. And so the kind of messiness of the whole thing with political conspiracies blowing across the landscape and intimations of a global conspiracy and cyber espionage from the Saudis and a tabloid newspaper with ties to Donald Trump. It was unbelievable. I mean, the sound of my jaw hitting the floor was probably audible, but I will say it was probably, accompanied by, I'll just admit, a kind of like, I'm not going to say journalistic glee, but certainly some excitement that my tame little business book is now going to be spruced up by this incredible saga that commanded the world's attention for some months. So it was an incredible story and a big surprise, but it also said a lot about how Bezos kind of reacts to adversity and the way in which he kind of outmaneuvered some of his adversaries, his enemies, and that whole saga was remarkable.
We're going to get to that. But first, you talk about how for so many years he cultivated this sort of humble public image. Mackenzie was driving him in the Honda minivan to work, even after they were already billionaires, I believe. He was very private. So was this a midlife crisis, or was this a guy who wanted to ride around in a super yacht all along?
Well, we're veering into territory where I feel like the ground's a little unsteady underneath me. But I actually feel like in some ways the transformation was there to observe. He buys the Washington Post. His eyes are opening up to a larger world. I actually quote his friend Jamie Dimon in the book. He joins business councils that are contemplating the political issues of the day. Amazon's business is expanding. He takes a personal interest in Prime Video, in Amazon Studios. He has that team coming up from Hollywood, and he's reviewing the new TV shows and movies and trying to articulate what might make a good franchise. He's throwing parties in LA at his property in Beverly Hills, and in these parties with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and all these stars, he's the center of attention. He's the host of the party. That has an impact on people. And I think he was really just enjoying that. Someone who had been obsessed for so long with the mechanics of his business, suddenly having, kind of access to the benefits of being one of the most prominent and successful business people in the world. So, that's tantalizing. That's pretty seductive. And basically, he's human, right? That was kind of the conclusion of the whole thing. And maybe what was so astonishing, this guy seemed like he was, flown in from another planet to go conquer the capitalist world. And he is human, right? And, no one knows what can happen inside any family or inside any marriage. But in some ways, it was another step towards kind of his citizenship to this larger elite world.
I did actually run into him at an Amazon Studios party after the Golden Globes, and he looked like he was having fun. And I'll have to admit, it's hard not to be intoxicated in an environment like that when you're surrounded by all of these famous people. But despite the fact that it's probably not how Bezos or Amazon wanted the world to learn about this, he did somehow beat the tabloids. How did he do that? How did he emerge unscathed?
It's an incredible story, and I don't know that we could call it subterfuge, right? Because I think there were reasons for him to suspect that the National Enquirer, that was owned by this company AMI, which did have ties to Trump World and to the Saudis, there might have been good reasons to suspect that the whole thing was part of a political conspiracy tied to his ownership of the Washington Post. You remember his Medium post, very effective, where he said that owning the Post was a complexifier for him. Well, it turned out, and this is my conclusion, I believe that this was the conclusion of the FBI and the Southern District of New York when they looked into this. I try to be kind of modest about it in the book because it's such a tangled, complex, secrecy-shrouded conspiracy. Maybe we find something out one day and I say, okay, my conclusions were premature. But it does appear that it was solely Lauren Sanchez's brother, Michael Sanchez, who delivered the information about the relationship to the National Enquirer. But Bezos wrote this post, accused the Enquirer of extorting him. It's such a tangled story that maybe it's it's too complex to even get into, but AMI was trying to get out from the cloud of political suspicion because they had a non-prosecution agreement with the Southern District of New York. So the idea that Bezos and his camp was raising that this was a political hit job was damaging to them. They send this email, and Bezos turns the table on them and publishes this Medium post accusing them of extortion. And because he's wrapping himself up in the mantle of the Washington Post at a time when Trump was attacking the media and other public institutions, sympathies swing to his side. And to the extent that people remember the whole saga, it's something to do with Saudi hacking and Trump, and not, for the sort of core of it, which was, the world's wealthiest guy got nailed by a tabloid newspaper, which was sort of the underlying truth.
And the conclusion is that it was basically just Michael Sanchez, Lauren's brother, sending the photos, right? There wasn't any ties to the Saudis or Trump or anything more sordid, right?
I'll put it this way. If we're to one day, well, I'll put it this way. There's no evidence that I believe that shows that. And if there were evidence that showed that the Saudis tipped off the Inquirer, or that a Trump world character somehow got the information from the Saudis and tipped off the Inquirer, it would actually contradict a lot of the testimony that's in those voluminous court files. A lot of what we kind of know for a fact, that the Inquirer got the information from Sanchez and started looking at it, and Michael Sanchez wasn't giving them all the information and they were trying to piece it together. That doesn't happen if the Saudis are sort of delivering, and so, yeah, I think it's a simpler story than maybe the conspiracies would have had us believe.
Though there is an interesting relationship between Jeff Bezos and MBS, which I actually didn't know about, and you have texts from MBS to Jeff Bezos, and I that honestly was mind blowing, given that there's no evidence that these two incidents are connected, but they were happening at the same
Well, let me clarify
time.
one thing.
Yeah, can you explain that a little more? Yeah.
Let me clarify one thing, because it is so tangled. So Amazon is cultivating the government to Saudi Arabia. They want to put data centers in the country. The government of Saudi Arabia and MBS is cultivating the West in 2017 and 2018. They exchanged text message phone numbers, WhatsApp numbers. And it is possible that MBS or the Saudis hacked Bezos's phone and the phone of other political and business leaders. I'm not, there was an investigative report by an independent group that concluded that there was some evidence of that. I don't think that's been conclusively shown, and there were some computer security consultants who cast doubt on it. So that may have happened. But what I'm sort of saying is evident is that it wasn't connected to the tabloid newspapers' pursuit of the Bezos personal scandal. It is kind of a wild coincidence, but as I sort of say in the book, however you cut this saga, there are some coincidences at play. Maybe we chalk it up to the bizarre world of the Trump years and how these kinds of things tended to happen with the media and institutions like the Washington Post often at the center of them.
So that actually brings me to my next question, because it is because he buys the Washington Post that he gets his first attack from Donald Trump, who ends up calling him Jeff Bozo in subsequent posts. Why did Bezos buy the Washington Post? And how has that bet turned out so far?
Well, I mean, it's back in 2013. The Post is a distressed media asset. He's friends with Donald Graham, the previous owner. He sees it as an opportunity to kind of apply his resources and his business acumen, to this important American institution. I don't tend to think that it was maybe a little bit tactical in terms of that might be a good PR opportunity. I don't think it really had much to do with access to political power. If it did, that backfired, because then what happened was, a hostile president and Donald Trump is elected, and it's 4 years of misery for Amazon and Bezos in terms of losing government contracts and having the relationship with the post office question. It's a great time for the Washington Post, right? And for other media companies, because subscribership goes way up and it really helps with the revival of the Post. But Yeah, there was a cost to Amazon. They lost the Jedi contract. Now maybe that gets renegotiated or scrapped because the courts are looking at that ruling and whether it was improperly awarded. But Amazon paid a price, I think, a little bit. But look, I mean, I think Bezos is proud of owning the Post, and it's probably helped his public image quite a bit. I say, he's seen as many things. A kind of domineering monopolist is one, but the proponent of a free press is another, right? And we like to see in the media world healthy institutions like the Post, and he's largely responsible for that.
Bezos and Amazon have gone to great pains to explain it is a truly independent publication from Amazon itself. Though I won't forget the time that I asked Alexa to read me the news, and it was two Washington Post reporters talking about an Amazon antitrust investigation. It was very meta. But have you seen any evidence that would undermine the assertion that it is truly independent from Amazon? And how has he run the Post?
Yeah, I think
I thought it was interesting before we go on to was that they presented him with a plan, and that required a lot of money and a lot of investment. He was like, oh no, like we're going to turn this into a profitable business. So it's not like he was just going to come in and throw money at the problem.
Right.
Really
I think that's maybe a misconception that his dollars allowed the Post to turn itself around. And in fact, he did reject those first few budgets, and he wanted to see it succeed organically. The question of editorial independence is, I think, is an easy one. I don't think he's really meddled in the editorial direction of the Post. He's turned down some offers for like the editorial page director to resign. He asked if Bezos wanted to appoint his own person. Bezos said no. But there have been ties to Amazon, I think connections to Amazon that have benefited the paper. So for example, it's kind of easy to get a Post membership, through Prime. Kindle owners and Kindle tablet owners have access to the paper, special access to the paper. They've developed, the Washington Post has developed special apps that come pre-installed on Amazon tablets, and that has an impact, right? I mean, the Post has 3 million digital subscribers, so it doesn't take much to move the needle. So the business ties to Amazon, I think, while they are run independently, and I think the partnerships, Jeff tries not to push, but he makes the connections. I think that's really benefited the paper. And then just the technical acumen of some of the engineers at the Post. Bezos gets involved in those discussions, and the Post now has a very successful business selling software to other media institutions. That started before Bezos owned the paper, but Jeff has really kind of sponsored it. And when the head technologist at the Post, this guy Shailesh, was about to almost quit the Post and go to the Wall Street Journal, Bezos not only convinced him to stay, but gave him an advisory position at Blue Origin, the space company. And so the ties between all the companies, I think in some small way have helped the Post.
Thank you for making my next segue for me, because I was about to move to Blue Origin, and we're going to get to broader Amazon next. But, I must have forgotten that Blue Origin was actually founded in the year 2000. It has been around for more than 20 years. And yet for, much of that time really struggled to get off the ground, pun intended. And now, just like last week, they announced they're taking their first human to space, beating SpaceX. Essentially. And so actually we've been getting a lot of great questions from the audience, and I want you to know, I want your questions, and I'm going to get to them. And this is my first one. How much of what Bezos is trying to do with Blue Origin has anything to do with his strategic business interests versus just a billionaire's competition with Elon Musk?
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think you already made the point that Blue Origin preceded SpaceX. So the visions of the two billionaires are somewhat aligned. I mean, they have different ideas about whether you go to Mars or you create space stations. But, Jeff didn't start it and isn't investing in it because of Elon. He was sort of already doing that before SpaceX came along. Now, SpaceX has moved faster and gone bigger and gotten better contracts from the government than Blue Origin has. And I think in that respect, it has caused Jeff to kind of double down on Blue Origin, to start investing more. Early on, he had some peculiar ideas about keeping it very small and limiting his investment. And he's the sole funder of Blue Origin. And now SpaceX is winning these contracts, going to space every week, taking astronauts to the space station, getting paid to experiment basically for the end goal of going to Mars. And I think Bezos looked at that and said, why am I selling $1 billion worth of Amazon stock? And he has tried to increase or heighten Blue Origin's ambitions. And that actually, I think, has created a little bit of dysfunction there. And the company has struggled. They have talked about now taking tourists to suborbital space. SpaceX skipped that step altogether, right? And I don't know if Blue Origin would ever admit that might have been a kind of distraction. They probably wouldn't in their eventual ambitions, but clearly, the idea of perfecting that step, New Glenn, their orbital rockets now still a couple of years away. And meanwhile, SpaceX has captured the world's imagination. So there is rivalry at play. I don't think it's a kind of copycat thing, but two guys who, maybe there's not one room that's big enough for the both of them.
Except early on, you actually recount them going to dinner together with their wives at the time. And they did in the early days have some interaction. And then it sounds like as it got more competitive, things changed and communication was cut off.
But interestingly, in one of those anecdotes that's in the book, Jeff brings Elon to a tour of Blue Origin's early offices, and he clears the office of personnel and any visible signs of what they're working on. So even back then, there was a little bit of a spirited rivalry, I think. And Elon told me that he disagreed with Blue Origin's choice of rocket propellant. And, so there were kind of technical debates, a little bit, maybe a little bit of friction even early on. And then you see him battling over Cape Canaveral launch sites and contracts, and now the moon contract. And, and Elon, of course, has absolutely no discipline when it comes to tweeting things, can get a little juvenile. And it's enormously entertaining to watch these two guys kind of go at it.
And you also mentioned the Amazon bot. We don't cover it enough, probably, a self-driving car company called Zoox, which could also be a new front for competition with Elon Musk and, of course, Tesla. What are Amazon's self-driving ambitions?
Well, I mean, obviously, they've got this massive transportation fleet. They're developing electric vehicles to try to reduce their carbon impact. And I think they're probably, Bezos is all about optionality and distributing bets and trying to figure out what will work. And if the future of package delivery or even passenger transportation is autonomous, and, we've been saying that for a while, that it will be. And, I think, the jury's kind of still out, at least in the next decade or so. Amazon wants to have a bet, right? So they've invested in Rivian, an electric truck company, and they've acquired Zoox. And if anything, they've been a little bit late to that race. But Amazon of almost any company, maybe alongside Uber, would benefit from autonomous technology to be able to deliver packages.
So, we talk a lot about Amazon's successes, and Jeff Bezos, you make the point a couple of times that he likes to bring up some of the same old jokes about Amazon's failures, like the Fire Phone. A question from our audience is asking about the failure of Haven, which is fairly recent, their joint attempt to disrupt healthcare, and they're not out of healthcare. Yeah, I mean, they still have a bet in pharmacy. But what do you predict will happen with Amazon's healthcare initiatives? And
Well, the way I think about Haven Healthcare, this joint venture between Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, and Amazon, is like, when we used to live in apartments with two other friends. And, so there are three roommates. And because there are three roommates, the bathroom never gets cleaned. Like, nobody wants to take responsibility for being the person that cleans the bathroom. And that's why Haven Healthcare seemed like such an odd initiative to begin with, right? These three big companies all invested in another company, and really nobody owning it or depending on it to be their big foray into healthcare. But healthcare, Amazon and Bezos see it as a major avenue of opportunity. He has a group inside Amazon called the Grand Challenge, and he'll meet with them personally a couple times a month. And their mission is just to generate new ideas. And so you mentioned Amazon Pharmacy, the acquisition of PillPack. They've got walk-in clinics. I think they're in Texas. Telehealth, a telehealth service for employees. There are now Alexa glasses that I believe came out of the Grand Challenge group. And so maybe they see some healthcare applications there. A wristwatch, which is sort of Fitbit-like, which hasn't really done much. But, clearly a big company, a $1.6 trillion company, needs to make big bets and enter big new industries if it's going to have a chance of getting to the next level of growth. And healthcare is one of the main ones.
So if there's only one person to clean the bathroom, then are you more optimistic about Amazon Care and some of these other things
Definitely
that they're working on?
Yeah, because they see this as foundational to the next phases of Amazon growth, and like Amazon, as much as they'll say that they're not motivated by competition, they really are, as all companies are. And they look at Apple and they look at Google and Microsoft, and those companies are viewing healthcare as a major opportunity for expansion. And that's a motivating force at Amazon. The idea of a land rush and great opportunity to use technology to disrupt an industry that hasn't changed a lot in the course of many years. And of course, as we've all experienced in the last year, there are opportunities for reform in our healthcare industry. And so I think we'll see them moving very quickly to try to find ways to bring Amazon devices and services into the world of healthcare.
Now, there seems to be a theme in that, whether it's Blue Origin or the Washington Post or many different initiatives at Amazon, that he seems to run his projects really lean. It's not like you throw a bunch of money at something, you don't, give a ton of people and resources to like make a big idea come to life. It's almost always a struggle, right? How can we do more with less?
Right.
Can you explain that strategy? And clearly it's a massive company and so many massive businesses within that company. But it's almost like, is it harder than it has to be given the resources that Amazon now has?
You're right. It's interesting. I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a philosophy that you keep a team nimble, you starve it a little bit for resources, and you create a kind of scrappiness or resourcefulness that might lead in interesting directions. And he had the same philosophy at Blue Origin. I think, in pockets that it can be counterproductive. But then you step back and you look at Amazon's accomplishments, and maybe there's something to it. I mean, they talk about 2 pizza teams at Amazon that are small enough that you could feed them with 2 pizzas, and single-threaded leaders, basically managers who are kind of like the CEO of their little pocket of Amazon. And it creates all sorts of organizational problems because sometimes these teams are butting heads and they're in competition with each other. Or products can come out with kind of a confusing mishmash of features shipped by different teams. That I think was very true in the early days of Alexa. But it's on a grand scale, it has probably been successful at Amazon. It's one of those idiosyncratic parts of the culture. It's also one of the reasons why you kind of worry, if you're an Amazon investor, at least, when you see a lot of turnover at the company, particularly among the upper ranks, because you need kind of experienced leaders and veterans in this weird way of working to keep it going. And frankly, there has been many departures from the senior leadership, including, of course, Jeff himself in the last couple of years.
All right, well, that was my next question. And we have a question from the audience about that as well. But it was a couple of months ago. Another big bomb drops in the middle of your reporting process. And I remember thinking, oh my God, has Brad's book gone to the printer yet or not? Because that is your biggest fear as an author, that you will spend 3 years working on something and something will happen and the whole thing is invalidated. But Jeff Bezos announces that he's stepping down as CEO of Amazon to be replaced by Andy Jassy, who was his first technical assistant in the late 90s. And he'll stay on as executive chair. Again, like, I probably asked you this at the time, but were you surprised, and
Right.
how surprised, and what can you tell us about why now, and why in general?
Right. Well, when I looked at kind of the narrative arc of my book, I realized that the story was already kind of there, of Bezos evolving as a leader, of other interests coming into view, not just the Post and Blue Origin, but the demands on his personal time from his philanthropy, and basically the very legitimate criticism from observers that he had amassed a singular fortune and that it was time to start giving it away. And then I reflected back, one of the episodes of my book is the House Antitrust Subcommittee proceeding, where Bezos is called to testify along with Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai. And he's sitting there on Zoom in the middle of the pandemic, and it's a political spectacle. And they're asking him all these questions and not letting him talk. And I just thought, did he really want to spend his time doing that? And if that is the next 5 years of Amazon's future, does he really want to be the figurehead? And we've seen, Emily, we saw Larry Page retreat from view because of that. And Sergey Brin to an extent, and I think that, that was probably a bit of a turning point. And with Andy Jassy, he not only has an accomplished deputy who is responsible for growing the cloud business, but someone who followed him around, who came from the retail business, and who really presents a humbler picture. So if you're the wealthiest guy in the world sitting in front of Congress, that's probably not going to go well. But Jassy, he presents a little bit of a different look. I think he's a more empathetic leader for Amazon, and maybe to a certain extent, along with realizing he wants to do other things than just focus on Amazon, there might have been a sense that Jassy might be the right leader for this next phase of scrutiny that Amazon is already going through.
As you point out, there have been many executive departures besides, Bezos himself. He'll stay on his chair. He's not, disappearing. But you mentioned Jeff Wilke, who was running the consumer unit for so many years. That was announced before Bezos announced that he was leaving. And we have a question from the audience. Do you think the executive departures suggest a rather broad changing of the guard? Like, is something bigger happening here? And how will the company weather that change?
Right. Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a changing of the guard. You had a senior leadership team, one, that had been kind of remarkably consistent for many years, and two, that there wasn't a lot of diversity on that management team. It was a very white and very male
for so
group.
long.
Right.
Why?
And
Why?
Because they're always reluctant and stubborn to resist what they see as external political pressure, and so they probably dug in for a while and refused to concede. And so there was a demand for an expanded leadership team and a more diverse leadership team. But two, I think you had these longtime executives who did 20 years at the company, were enormously wealthy, had probably a little bit of an itch to go and, start their own thing or run their own thing. And were probably, and had been running at full speed for a very long time. And so you can kind of see why the time might've been right. And maybe there was an element that, that Jeff's moving on, or even that he had become, a subject of tabloid interest, and was spending time in LA and DC, and maybe, I don't know, that maybe that was disillusioning to some. And I think all these elements kind of combined to create some turnover. And I think that will be one of the biggest challenges that Andy Jassy has, because he now has to come in and continue to run this massive company without some of the people who kind of know how it works. And I don't know, it'll be the big challenges. Have they been developing that next generation of leadership to come in and take the place of the old guard?
So a question from our audience, and certainly the antitrust issues loom large and will be a big part of Amazon's next chapter. Do you think Amazon is too big? Do you think Amazon should be broken up? And if it were to be broken up, how?
Right.
From the audience.
Okay, I'm not an advocate. There are plenty of people who can make that case. who want to make that case, who write books making that case. What I'll say is that I think it's a really difficult issue for lawmakers and regulators to really understand. And I think it will be challenging to break up Amazon. And I look back at Microsoft in the 1990s, where it had a clear monopoly in the Windows, in the operating system industry, and was engaged in pretty anti-competitive and predatory behavior with regard to Netscape, if some people remember. And also made mistakes in how they communicated internally, and the depositions for Bill Gates and others were kind of hostile, and Microsoft wasn't broken up. And now Microsoft's a larger company than Amazon. Well, Amazon's really not a conventional monopoly, right? It is a small percentage of retail. It has big competitors, Microsoft and Google, in cloud computing, IBM and Oracle. Walmart's a bigger company by sales. So the case is harder to make. And government is distracted. You've got Facebook and Google lining up. It's like, take a ticket at the deli counter for which company is going to, get sued first. And the issues are complex. Now, the Biden administration has signified a willingness in their rhetoric and who they've appointed to the DOJ and FTC to take a tough line. But breaking them up, unwillingly is a multi-year legal process that often extends farther than any one political administration lasts. And a lot of things need to fall in line. And I think it's a tough case. So I do think antitrust scrutiny is coming for Amazon, but unless they willingly carve the thing up, and then we've got a lot of little Amazons running around, probably even more dominating than big Amazon, I don't think we're going to see any kind of like a death blow to Jeff Bezos and his empire anytime soon.
Well, one thing that Amazon and all of these companies have working against it is that we seem to see agreement from both sides of the aisle that something needs to be done about big tech's power, and Congress rarely agrees on anything. So certainly that, I would expect that would give this some momentum. Some of the main issues at play are, one, how Amazon treats its sellers, its third-party sellers, and two, making of Amazon branded products that then compete with its sellers. And one thing that I thought was interesting is you went back to some of the sellers who in your first book were super positive about Amazon to see what they had to say rather than trying to find new voices. And you actually found a change in tone. Tell us about that.
Well, so the sellers were actually sellers who had been mentioned by Bezos in his shareholder letter. And there was also one who had testified on Amazon's behalf in the Indiana State House and in Washington, D.C. And so, my idea was, often in the media, we're taking anecdotes and weaving a portrait of dissatisfaction, but how can we really know what the overall sentiment is? And in fact, absent some all-powerful poll, that was going to be impossible to determine. And so why don't I go to the allies, the people that Bezos himself had touted as being representatives of the best of the Amazon third-party marketplace? And almost 201, they had problems with the way that the marketplace had evolved, that, they felt that the onslaught of overseas sellers in countries without taxes or with lower taxes, without any guidelines or safeguards for the quality of products, that all these things had undermined their businesses. The stories were actually kind of quite sad, that they had created profitable businesses and hired people and then sort of watched as they lost it all because the rules of the Amazon marketplace changed. And there was some bitterness too. It wasn't uniform. There were some folks who advocated for change, but were still doing business on the Amazon platform. But I thought it was a great microcosm of the reality of the marketplace, how brutal a kind of capitalist frontier it is, and how Amazon's marketing around this, that they are the advocate for small business. You've probably seen the advertisements where the lights turn on in the woodworking shop and Americans are going to business to sell on Amazon and build their companies. And it's a more complicated reality right now. And that's why telling the stories of these sellers was important.
Well, and I think the book business is probably one of the most telling indications of how Amazon has changed an industry. Like your book is going to sell in an independent bookstore for $30.
Right.
And on Amazon, it's what, I don't know, it's like 12 right now.
Well, the
How
Kindle,
does that
the,
happen?
the Kindle, right? The Kindle price, but but this is a decades-long disruption to the book industry, and Barnes and Noble and Borders, may it rest in peace, were the first kind of conglomerates to come in and start discounting, and yeah, it's been terrible, and Amazon takes it to a whole other level. And and what I say is, like, I started this book tour with an event at my local bookstore in Marin County, and I asked people, if you buy there, we'll sign the book, and it's just like, people have to make decisions to support these businesses, because it's very easy to shop on Amazon, and and if we want to see these businesses survive, if we want to have a Main Street or a community that has the variety of local businesses and places where we can go post-COVID, to see a speaker or to meet other people or to get to know the proprietor, we have to support these businesses. So yeah, Amazon's like the culmination of some of these changes in our economy. It's by no means like the exclusive enemy of small mom and pop merchants. 10 years ago, the drama was around Walmart. Now it's Amazon. But Amazon is, because it's so pervasive, because it has this data advantage. I mean, you mentioned the private labels, and we can talk about that. It is a formidable power.
Well, and clearly the counterpoint is, look at all of these merchants that Amazon has empowered and given an enormous distribution channel to. But I wonder if you see a company out there that is a threat to Amazon, and if how you think about a company like Shopify, which prides itself on being a friendlier partner to small and medium businesses. I interviewed the CEO of Shopify, and he said, if Amazon is building an empire, we're arming the rebels. And how big a threat do you think that is?
Not a threat to the empire, but maybe a threat to one of its provinces. So when the company gets so big and does so many things, it can't necessarily focus on all of its constituencies. And one constituency at Amazon is brands, and this is the retail business, and they want to be, they hope to be a safe spot for the Nikes and all the clothing apparel brands and the electronics brands and whatnot. But another province is the marketplace, and where they'll tell any seller anywhere in the world, come sell your sneakers. And a Nike sees that and says, no, thank you. We want to protect our $200 shoe, and we don't want to be in competition with the $10 shoe that doesn't have a swoosh. Maybe it does, but it has something, an insignia that's related. And Amazon has very, I think, clearly tilted towards the marketplace model, where anybody can sell. And that creates an opportunity for a Shopify to come in and to say to a Nike or whatever brand, we will be a safe space, and we will power you to go directly to customers. So, that's a great anecdote to illustrate what the vulnerability is for a big company, any big company, but particularly Amazon. It's doing so many things that there are these little avenues of opportunity for entrepreneurs or new businesses. Oh, and by the way, I'm sure Amazon secretly loves it, because when they get hauled in front of Congress and accused of being a monopoly, they could say, well, look, there's all this legitimate competition. It's not just Google or Apple or Walmart. There's little Shopifys that can spring up. So it's a great example of I think, a vulnerability for Amazon and an opportunity for entrepreneurs.
I want to talk a little bit about the workplace culture in the in corporate Amazon, and also in the warehouses, which of course has become a huge story, especially over the course of the pandemic. There's been a lot of worker agitation, but also Amazon just won a high profile union vote where employees voted not to unionize. And I'm curious, starting with the warehouses, what you think about how Amazon treats its workers. And Amazon has said repeatedly, like, first of all, we pay more, our workers enjoy great benefits, and the vast majority of them are very happy. Have you found that to be true?
I've talked to dozens and dozens of employees at Amazon fulfillment centers for both books, and you find like a variety of opinion. I belong to all the message boards on Facebook and elsewhere. It's a little bit like the sellers, what I was saying before. It's really hard. It's easy to draw a picture of disillusionment by plucking out some anecdotes. And the reverse is true, right? You can pick the true believers, and it's just more complicated. And look, I mean, I think that it's a reality of kind of warehouse work life in America and the world today, that these are hard jobs. They are quite low paid jobs. I don't think this has displaced more higher compensated work. The union jobs of the steel mills, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, those went away in the 70s and 80s. At the same time, that I do feel like that there are certain parts of the Amazon contract with its workers that do lack a little empathy. And Emily, I'll give you an example. Bezos decided early on, according to one of my sources, that one of the dangers to Amazon was an entrenched and disgruntled hourly workforce. He thought, he knew these weren't going to be great jobs, and if people stayed there for many years, eventually they might, become susceptible to the kind of union activity that a century ago took over the auto workers and the auto companies, and has arguably kind of slowed them down and made them less innovative. Tesla, for example, is not a union shop, and it's obviously been very disruptive. And so he basically instituted a rule in the Amazon warehouses that after 3 years, workers, if they weren't being promoted, they were no longer eligible for pay raises. It's a very subtle thing. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but workers after 3 years, if they're not moving up, they're really encouraged in a subtle way to move out. And, I think that there's an unfriendliness to that. There's a sort of paternalistic view that, one, maybe you're better off elsewhere, and two, we kind of don't want you to stick around. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the diminishing options for workers, American workers today, and the fact that Amazon in a lot of towns is the only game in town, there's room for improvement. And I think, look, Bezos admitted that in his last investor letter, where he said he was going to spend some time looking at Amazon's relationship with its employees. The last point, though, is Amazon has a lot of advantages in the battle with unions, and we saw that in Bessemer, and employees voted 2-1 against unionizing at a point when the political winds were kind of blowing in favor of organized labor, and even the president of the United States was kind of trying to tilt the balance in favor of the workers organizing, and they voted against it. So Amazon's got a lot of advantages, and you can make the case in at least some facilities that workers really don't see the need or the utility of organizing and forming a union.
What about in corporate headquarters? It seems that he was and has been as, I don't know if brutal is the right word, but managing talent out that maybe hits a plateau, right? Amazon has a devoted employee base of Amazonians, but it's also not like filled with rainbows and sunshines. Amazon employees aren't necessarily the highest paid in the tech industry. How would you describe the corporate culture, and how do you expect that culture to change with a new CEO?
Yeah, it's interesting. And in the book, I go back to 2015 and that explosive New York Times article, that called out a bruising workplace. And people probably remember, for the detail of people weeping at their desks. And Amazon, objected quite vociferously to that, in public and in private. And yet I think they recognized that there was a meanness to the culture, and they made some very small changes. Well, maybe more than small, but in terms of the employee review process and allowing employees to change jobs if they had problems with their manager, and a sort of internal judicial system almost to adjudicate employees who are in danger of getting fired. Little things in the review system and whatnot that I think made it a little bit friendlier. And now you fast forward today, and sometimes the pendulum goes back and forth, and you hear different things. It certainly is. Bezos said early on he never wanted it to be a country club. He didn't want employees to get comfortable in the same way he doesn't want them to get comfortable or entitled in the fulfillment centers. And everything, including the compensation system, the way that they receive stock, is oriented towards keeping them moving quickly, arms outstretched, trying to achieve the next goal. And that's Bezos. And you could argue that maybe he's lacking a little bit of that empathy gene that might stop you or I from building a vast global empire. And I think Andy Jassy, to answer the last part of your question, maybe has a little bit more of that. So it will be interesting to see how things evolve in terms of corporate culture. But it's all quite deliberate. It is a tough place to work, and Bezos wants it that way. He wants his employees kind of moving quickly and never resting on their laurels.
So excellent question from the audience. Is the world better with Amazon in it? What is most important for us to have our eyes open about when it comes to the perils and the promise of Amazon?
It's a really good question. And it's interestingly, I think, one that Bezos himself tried to answer in the last investor letter, where he lays out this mathematical calculus of everything Amazon has added to the world in terms of employee compensation and convenience for customers and utility for web services companies, customers. And of course, he's making the argument that it's a positive legacy. And there's some stuff on the negative side of the ledger, for sure. The small companies that go out of business because they can't compete, or the carbon that's put into the atmosphere because of Amazon trucks and vans that are now driving, and airplanes that are flying packages around, and maybe that extra little product that we buy and we don't need just because Amazon makes it so darn easy. But where I net out on this, I think, is I'm an Amazon customer, and I have an Alexa. I have a couple of them to the kind of consternation of my kids, and we're Prime members, and we watch the TV shows and movies. And generally, I feel like, well, one, it would be hypocritical to say that this is a dangerous force in our society, and I don't believe it. And two, I feel like it's actually, unlike a lot of other tech companies where I feel like I give time, I sometimes feel like I get time back from Amazon, like a little thing. I'm not going to the drugstore or searching for it. It's coming to me. And I think, that's really seductive, that Amazon has created this kind of convenience engine for the world, or at least for, the Western world, countries where it operates. And, and generally that's probably a good thing. And it's also, made other companies that might have, been a little bit more passive, cause them to kind of raise their game, to get serious about online selling, to allow returns. Amazon's great in you get something that you didn't order or that doesn't work, and they just credit your account, and they have the luxury of doing that. And then other retailers see that and have to follow suit. And these things have all been kind of good for customers. So I'm gonna say that on the grand ledger, Amazon nets out on the positive. There's still plenty of reasons to critique it and plenty of rooms for improvement. But I don't after now 2 exhaustive books feel like it's a pernicious force. But certainly plenty of reasons to continue to scrutinize it. And look, I think, just to answer the last part of the question, going back to what I said before you click buy now, just taking a moment to consider that those dollars might prop up or nurture a local business that you want in your community. And that's something I hope people take away from the book too.
Now, with Jeff Bezos taking a step back from Amazon proper, what do you expect him to do? Another question from our audience: will he play a bigger role in philanthropy? Which, to be fair, it took a little bit of time for him to start giving more prolifically. And in fact, Mackenzie actually beat him on a number of fronts, and she was pretty quick. Will he do more to fix the world,
right,
rather than just change it?
Right. Well, I do agree that he was a little late, and I remember the year 2000, and people were clamoring for Bill Gates to start giving away his fortune, and of course he did pivot quite heavily and left Microsoft and started the foundation. And Bezos is at a comparable time, right? The fortune is enormous. His legacy will be viewed in part by how he distributes that money. His goals have expanded. He started with early childhood schooling with the Day One Academy. And now, last year or maybe end of 2019, he announced the Bezos Earth Fund to give away $10 billion in grants to climate change organizations. And what's interesting, and I write about this a little bit in the book, is that he's run into some trouble because the more progressive climate organizations feel a little bit wary about accepting Amazon dollars, considering its labor record. So
I thought that was fascinating how
Yeah.
many organizations didn't want his money.
and like, so that's a challenge for him. But I want to be optimistic, because climate change is the defining challenge of our time. And if the greatest intellect of our time with the greatest fortune can go and make an impact, I want to believe. I want to be a true believer. I want him to either invent or invest in the carbon capture company or the reforestation company or something that maybe we haven't even thought of, and to go and create a secure future for our children. So I hope, I hope that's where he spends some time. The tantalizing playground of space is there also. I don't get personally as excited about that. I'm not going up in New Shepard. I don't know about Emily.
You're not gonna submit a bid?
Are you going? If asked, if Bezos says we want to take a journalist, would you go?
Oh my goodness. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah,
Let me see a successful launch first.
Yeah, me too. I don't think I would. But I don't know that the world needs that as much as it needs, climate change solutions. And so, I think those are the two places where he's going to spend a lot of his time now.
Similarly, where do you expect, and this is another question from our audience, where do you expect Amazon to expand, whether regionally or in various products? And by the way, where is my octocopter? Where is my octocopter that's supposed to be delivering my packages straight to my doorstep? Right. That hasn't happened.
No. Are you looking for the drone? Yeah. Well, it was 2013. He went on 60 Minutes to talk about that. And it was a very strange public relations ploy. I think the technology is probably farther along than the regulatory climate. But the funny thing is they don't really need that right now because they've got the vans and the trucks crawling our neighborhoods. And it's always going to be more, I think, economical to fill a van with packages and drop them off one by one than to go one by one, sending packages soaring through the air. I mean, maybe for some far off locales, I could see that being maybe practical, but that seems still far off, and maybe a little bit of a false setting of expectations by Bezos back in 2013. But you asked what else, and we talked about healthcare. They've been working on a home robot forever. We broke that story at Bloomberg. I'm trying to think what they called that project. This maybe it'll come to me in a second, but this idea of kind of a little Alexa R2D2 following around our homes, following us around. They see that as an avenue of opportunity. And then satellites is another one. They, in competition with SpaceX and Starlink, Amazon has Project Kuiper, and they want to launch satellites and offer internet access around the world. And that could be another avenue for growth. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see when Bezos kind of steps away. He says he's going to continue working on these new things. To what extent does he really hang around and continue to, contribute that kind of magic of the founder to make these things happen inside a big company? Because I think without him there, some of these things probably go away.
So seems like Amazon's starting, and Jeff Bezos too, another interesting decade-long chapter that might
I know where you're going.
a third book.
No, definitely. No, I can't even conceive that right now. We'll talk in 10 years.
Well, look, let's end it with, what do you want readers to take away from this book? I mean, obviously it's a company that I think one of our viewers said it best, has a lot of promise and perils associated with it, has changed our lives dramatically, will continue to change our lives. And one of the most interesting quotes that I took away from the book was Jeff Bezos saying something like, every company goes bankrupt, and they don't go bankrupt after 100 years, they go bankrupt after 30 years. Like, do you think Amazon's going to go bankrupt after 30 years? I mean, we're almost there.
Right.
Or do you think this is a company that can last a century, knowing that he's not going to be around for a century, but has certainly built a foundation
Right.
that he hopes will last?
I think the underlying kind of mechanics of Amazon are so strong right now. It's very difficult to imagine the company slowing down or being really disrupted in any significant way anytime soon. I mean, the fact is, like, they just did this big billion-dollar bond raise this week. And we know about that because we work at Bloomberg, where we obsess about these things. But they take that money, which is really cheap capital, and they invest in new fulfillment centers and new data centers. And that entrenches their advantages. It means that we're going to get things faster and less expensive, and that the AWS prices will be lower, and the internet speeds will be faster. And so the kind of underlying clockwork of Amazon is so strong, the foundation so strong, that I do not think that they get disrupted anytime soon. But sometimes these companies, they have to reinvent themselves, invent new things, stay fresh, keep the halo of innovation sparkling, and that might keep criticism at bay. And in that respect, if Bezos moves on, he is, as we've talked about, the heart of the inventive spirit of Amazon. And so replacing that will be the great challenge of the next couple of decades.
Well, here we've been speaking for almost an hour and a half, and I thought we would run out of things to talk about, but we haven't even gotten to 75. We didn't talk about Amazon Go or grocery or Whole Foods or AWS. I mean, there's so much more. So that's,
We've got a whole book for people
your
to
cue.
think about that.
As part of the Computer History Museum's one word initiative, you were asked to write down one word of advice for a young person starting out in their career. So could you please share your one word with us?
Right. Okay.
Story
So
behind it.
For a young journalist, I wrote down doggedness. And essentially, I thought about early in my career and like the challenges of making a name for yourself and getting the story. And I just always found that it's like doggedness and tenacity and, asking the questions or knocking on the doors or trying to unravel the mystery when others have kind of left the scene. That's always been like the key to whatever success I've had. And so, it's not like what we do, Emily, is sometimes like not, high science, but it's really just like being there and continuing to ask the questions and being persistent. And, another thing about doggedness is like, it kind of, I feel like conveys being a pain in the butt a little bit. And that's part of like it too, and I'm sure I've been annoying as heck to Amazon. And, and that's, I think, just part of the calling for a journalist.
Well, it is a riveting book, and I mean that. Like, it's actually a page turner, and I can't say that about a lot of business books. And it's really more than a business book. It's a company and a person that is changing our world still in this moment as we speak. So thank you for writing it, and thanks for sharing your time with us. And Daniel, I believe I'm sending it back to you.
Thank you, Emily.
Right. Thanks, Emily. And thanks, Brad. What a terrific story and a great conversation between you two. It's really clear in listening that digital transformation is clearly here to stay. And as Emily said, in summarizing a personal view, in this case, Jeff Bezos, and Brad's excellent interpretation of Jeff's passion and his focus and his will, it is really indicative of the Computer History Museum's worldview going forward, which is that without computing, life as we know it doesn't exist. And the structural changes, the innovative processes that Jeff Bezos and Amazon have employed and deployed are really driving an immense set of changes in our society. And it's hard to predict where they're going to end. Clearly, from the barcodes on the back of books, that was the beginning of Amazon, to the structural code, the software, the regulatory codes, the questions about the future of business and these business models is amazing. So I want to encourage all of you who've spent the time with us this afternoon to take a close look at the website and encourage you to support CHM. We love these programs and we'd like to continue facilitating them. So again, thanks to Brad and thanks to Emily. And thank you all for spending the afternoon with us. Good night.